in Oracle, we're now going to focus on the business suite. And for those people that do not know me, my name is Richard Spithoven. I'm one of the managing partners within a company which is called B.lay. B.lay is a company that is supporting end users to manage software licenses in a proper way, and doing that on a global basis. But before I joined B.lay, I was working in the Oracle License Management Services organization, where the last 4.5 years of my years within Oracle, I fulfilled the position of regional director for the team of the Europe South LMS organization, which means that all the Oracle audits that were performed in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, France, Italy, and Spain were under my responsibility. And before that, I was a licensing consultant myself, performing audits at the larger customers in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So over the last decade, more or less, I've been working a lot about Oracle and Oracle audits and Oracle licensing. And apart from myself hosting this presentation, I asked one of my team members to join, which is in this case Tudor. Tudor, can I ask you to give yourself a short introduction to the audience?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tudor Stoinescu. I'm a senior software licensing analyst for B.lay. I joined B.lay last year in June, and I previously worked for Oracle as a part of a technical analysis team for e-business suite product. And for 2 years and a half, so I took care of EBS technical analysis. And I will gladly answer all EBS licensing questions that you might have. Thank you.
Super, thanks, Tudor. So for today's session within the agenda, we have covered a number of topics. So first of all, we're going to talk about the audit methodology that needs to be followed for an e-business suite audit, where you have two different methodologies, one for a user-based measurement and the other one the usage-based measurement. And then the second part of the presentation will be focused about the most common license compliance issues seen for a number of licensing metrics, like application user versus application user read-only. What is primary usage? What about concurrent usage? What's the difference between a professional user and an employee user? And what is the difference between professional user, internal, and external? Terminologies that you may not be familiar with, but where I hope after this session you'll have a better understanding of. And then the third and the fourth topics that we have covered for this agenda is about what are the most compliance issues seen if we're talking about the e-business suite applications itself, and then more specifically about human resources, order management, enterprise asset management, and self-service work requests. And then the last part is all about customizations that end user organizations typically perform on the Oracle e-business suite installation, and what license compliance issues are typically seen in there, and what you should be aware of if you are an e-business suite customer, or if you're dealing with an e-business suite customer, so that you are aware of the risks that such an end user can face. So let's start with the first topic on the agenda, the audit methodologies, and then let's first focus on the user-based licensing models. So what a lot of end users sometimes are not even familiar with is that in order to perform an e-business suite audit, there is an audit trail functionality in the e-business suite software itself. So you don't need to run a specific script to gather usage information. The functionality to perform an audit is in the software itself. And such an audit trail can be enabled on different levels, where to start the audit, you would need to set the audit trail on responsibility or a form level, which means that on a certain level of detail, the usage information of all the different individuals that are logging into the business suite are being tracked for a period of time. And then once you've enabled the audit trail within the business suite itself, there are a number of tables called F&D tables, in which the data is being populated in the underlying database. Typically, obviously, the Oracle database, because it's an Oracle product. And those tables that are listed here in the slide deck are then containing all the information that you need to have, like the login tables, the login responsibilities, the users, the applications, the installations, That kind of information is then being populated in those tables. And then once the audit trail has been enabled and those tables have been populated with that data, you would need to perform an export, which you can do manually, or you can use an export script to export that data to start looking into the real usage of the eBusiness Suite software. And what you would need to do in there then is that you would need to look at the different users that are defined within the software and see what responsibilities those users have assigned to itself and how those responsibilities are linked to the installed application modules within the eBusiness Suite software. And in that analysis, you would need then to map the responsibilities that you find to be assigned to the different users to the different licensable eBusiness Suite programs. So actually you need to make a translation from user to responsibility to application module that that responsibility gives access to the specific eBusiness Suite license the customer is entitled to make use of. So it's a lot of analysis work in there. And if you just look at an example, if you would, for example, look at the data of an eBusiness Suite installation and you would see that there is a human resource application module installed with an ID 800, which are standard identifications within the eBusiness Suite itself, and you see that there are 3 different responsibilities assigned to this application, like HR Manager, Global Payroll Manager, or Time Management Manager, you need to make sure that those responsibilities are being mapped to the specific licensable eBusiness Suite programs to which those responsibilities are related, like human resources, payroll, and time and labor. Now, this is just one example of how you would need to do such a mapping, but you can understand that one individual, one user, can have multiple 10s or 20s of responsibilities assigned to itself, which can relate to different eBusiness Suite application programs itself as well. So it's a lot of mapping of users' responsibilities and installed eBusiness Suite applications in order to understand what specific license is needed. Apart from the user-based methodology, there is also a so-called usage-based methodology. So if you're talking about auditing eBusiness Suite, then the user-based licensing methodologies are always related to the audit trail we just talked about. And you should then think about licensing metrics like named user or application user. But the eBusiness Suite programs from Oracle are sometimes also licensed on a different type of metric, which we call, or what Oracle would call, usage-based metrics. And then you need to think about the number of employees of your organizations or the number of electronic order lines that your software facilitates, or the number of expense reports entered by your end user individuals into the system, compensated individual, trainee, person. Now, all those licensing metrics that are not user-based, we call usage-based. And for those usage-based licensing metrics, you would need to run separate queries to query the data of different tables within the Oracle eBusiness Suite. So for example, for those people that are very technical in this call, if you would need to query the amount of employees within the eBusiness Suite software, you would perform the query that is listed here in the slide deck, where you do select count from per people underscore F table, where the current employee flag is tagged yes. So actually what this query from a technical perspective does, it queries a table called per people underscore F, where all the employees which are entered into the system do have the status yes for the flag, meaning the employee is still active. That would be the result of such a query. Now, this is one example of a query. Another example, and I'm not going to explain that in more detail, but if you would, for example, want to query the amount of expense reports within the eBusiness Suite software, you see there is a way more bigger query that you would need to execute on the database under the eBusiness Suite software itself to get that information out of the software. So, as typically it is the case for Oracle licensing, there is not just one press on the button and you have all the data that you need to quantify the number of licenses. Different queries and different scripts would need to be executed in order to gather the specific information that you would need to have. And therefore, At all times, if you want to establish the licensing position for any business suite customer, make sure that there is a clear understanding of the contractual agreed licensing metric to understand what you really need to measure, especially because of the diversity of licensing metrics that Oracle has applied over the years. Now, if we're then moving to the differences between application user and application user read-only licenses, the first thing I think is good to be aware of is that, let's say, 60–70% of all the e-business suite licenses are being sold on a so-called application user licensing metric. And if you have a closer look to the licensing metric definition of an application user, you see that an application user is defined as an individual which is authorized by you to use the specific application, which are installed on a single or on multiple servers, regardless of whether the individual is actively using the programs at any given time. So it's crucial to understand that all the individuals that you authorize to make use of the software are required to be licensed. Even if those people are not actively using the software, it still requires an individual to be licensed if they do have access to the software. And if one person, for example, has access to, let's say, Oracle Financials, which is installed on 2 different machines, think, for example, about a production environment and a test environment, then that one individual would still only require 1 license because you count the number of individuals, not the number of individuals per installation. It's the number of individuals over all the machines that are authorized to make use of a specific application program. Now, since within the e-business suite you also have types of usage in which entering data or deleting data or modifying data is not really needed, but people only need to have read access. Think, for example, about people that need to review certain financial reports entered into the e-business suite software, where the type of usage is less intensive than the full usage of people that are inserting data. Oracle also has a way cheaper licensing model, which is called application user read-only. And within that licensing model, you look at all the individuals still that are authorized to make use of the software, but those people are only authorized to run queries or reports against the application programs for which you already have non-read-only licenses. So if you, for example, would make use of Oracle Financials, you can only have application user read-only licenses if there are also application user licenses for financials. So it's only a licensing metric that you can apply for a subset of your population that has, let's say, less intensive usage of a specific product, and therefore it is cheaper. But you always need to have the normal application user licenses for a specific program in order to be able to buy application user read-only licenses as well. If you wouldn't have that, then by definition, that would cause a license compliance issue. Now, one other licensing model that has been applicable in the past, it's not longer sold anymore by Oracle at this moment in time, is the so-called concurrent usage or concurrent device licensing metric. And although the licensing metric isn't being sold anymore by Oracle for many, many years, there are still quite some customers that still have this licensing metric. And as per every software licensing contract, if a customer still has those licenses, the terms and conditions of those licenses remain to be valid. Now, how does such a licensing metric work? Within the concurrent usage licensing metric, you at all times need to look at the maximum number of users and or devices that are simultaneously making use of the software, and that peak usage is then required to be licensed. So if you, for example, would look at this graph, then in this case, the peak usage in this period of time of 12 units would be 100, and therefore the customer would need to have 100 concurrent user licenses. Now, this licensing metric is typically very interesting for customers that still have them, because think, for example, about larger organizations in which 1,000 individuals may work in a company, but they work in 2 shifts, so 500 users, let's say, in the morning, and 500 users in the evening. Under a concurrent user model, you would only need to have 500 concurrent user licenses, because that is the maximum number of users that at a certain moment in time can at the same time make use of the software. Where if under the current licensing metric of an application user, you would need to license 1,000 application user because every single individual is required to make use of it. So therefore, customers that still have concurrent user licenses, it's typically a very interesting licensing metric to pay for fair usage, but it requires you to do proper and active software license management in order to make sure that the available concurrent user licenses are being allocated in the most cost-efficient way and to cover the heaviest usage. During audits, if customers do not have a process in place in which they manage their concurrent usage on a regular basis, typically you will result in the fact that Oracle will force you to migrate your current concurrent user licenses into a typically less favorable application user licensing metric. So to make a very long story short, concurrent user licenses are definitely adding a lot of value for customers, only if they manage it in a proper way, but it's considered to be one of the few metrics where fair usage of the software is being priced and licensed in an appropriate way. Now we're moving to the next licensing metric. Then we're going to talk about the professional user and the employee user. And the professional user and the employee user licensing metrics were actually sold in the period of February 2000 till March 2003, in which a professional user actually represents an individual to get the right to make use of a suite or a bundle of different eBusiness Suite applications. And those eBusiness Suite applications are then typically defined in an appendix of the ordering document. So here you can see it's a bit of a vague extract from a contract, but you see that in this contract of this customer that has professional user licenses, they do have the right to make use of marketing, sales, order management and logistics, procurement, manufacturing, maintenance, etc., etc., etc. Now, what we see happening a lot with customers that do have such a professional user license is that they wrongly assume that they have a license for eBusiness Suite, so they can make use of any module within the eBusiness Suite software. Obviously, that is not the case because the customer only obtained the right to make use of those modules which are listed in the specific amendment of the contract. And that is something that people always should be aware of. Now, with those bundle or suite licenses from the professional user and the employee user, there is one other thing that a lot of people typically forget. Because under the professional user and the employee user licensing model, there is, as for many Oracle software programs, a minimum number required licenses that you need to comply with. So if a customer has professional user licenses, then the standard terms and conditions from the Oracle License and Service Agreement will specify that at least 10% of your employee population is required to be licensed, independent of the amount of the actual number of users. So if you, for example, would have an organization of 10,000 employees and you only have 10 different people within your organization making use of the eBusiness Suite software for which you purchase professional user licenses, then still you would need to have 10% of your employee population, in this example, 1,000 people to be licensed on a professional user metric. Something that a lot of people typically tend to forget, especially because of the fact that the growth of the company, independent of the real usage of the software, can have an impact on the minimum number of required licenses that a customer would need to have. And then the other thing with regards to professional users and employee user licenses is that there is a minimum that at least 20% of a total employee population typically needs to be licensed as a minimum for the amount of professional user and employee user licenses together. So if we would look at the same example, if you would have professional user and employee user licenses and your organization would be 10,000 people big, then at least 20% of the 10,000 people within your organization would need to have either a professional user license or an employee user license to make sure that you are covering the minimum number of licenses. And then, since you have those different metrics, you would also need to make sure that within your eBusiness Suite installation, you manage those different user populations in an appropriate way. Because if you do not make a clear distinction in your eBusiness Suite user setup, it will require you that at all times during an audit, Oracle will force you to license the stronger licensing metric, in this case the professional user, because you haven't been able to make a distinction between employee users and professional users. And that is typically much more expensive than if you are able to make the distinction between which individuals are professional user and which individuals are employee users. Now, then at a later stage, Oracle, of course, changed its licensing model as well, because historically, the enterprise software was really developed and used to support the internal business processes of an organization. So think about human resources, HR, or think about financials, or think about order management. But as IT developed, at a certain moment, there was also a need to get support to make sure that the business processes between organizations, so the B2B business, was going to be supported by the software as well. And therefore, since this usage of the software was changing from only internal versus internal and external, a differentiation was being made in the licensing models from Oracle. So the professional users were divided into two categories. You had professional user internal licenses for those individuals within the own organization to license them properly, but you also had professional user external for those individuals from another external company that also needed to have access to your software. Think, for example, about suppliers that want to make sure that from a logistical perspective, there is a clear process between two big organizations, or from an order management perspective, or trading. All those kind of business processes in which businesses need to work together would require individuals outside your own organization to be licensed as well. And since this type of usage from external users is typically less than the usage of the internal people within an organization, those external user licenses were also cheaper. But it required and still requires end users to make a clear distinction between which individuals are real internal employees or internal people making use of the software, and which individuals are actually external people that needs to be counted as an external user. And then typically what customers would need to do is that they need to apply a certain naming convention within their user setup, or make sure that the company email addresses from where the individual is working for are registered correctly, in order to make sure that the clear distinction about what user population is externally can be made out of the software. And if people don't do that and have not a proper user management and just enter the names of those individuals, the risk is that during an audit, you will just be accounted for as all internal users, which were much more expensive, and therefore, from a cost-effective perspective, of course, something you would not want to do. However, then moving to some common compliance issues for specific applications, then the first that we see a lot happening is about the application module called Human Resources, where we see that prior October 2006, the application module Human Resource was sold on the metric person. But after October 2006, Oracle changed its metric for human resources from person to the metric employee. And all those organizations that are making use of HR and purchased licenses before 2006 have been recommended and should migrate their HR licenses to the current employee metric. But typically, since the migration or the change of a metric from person to employee is something that is more an administrative thing to do, there are many, many end users that still have both metrics in place for person and employee, and also pay support maintenance for it, actually resulting in the fact that they have twice a licensing metric applicable for their usage of human resources, and therefore paying twice support maintenance for it, which is actually a loss of revenue for end users. Now, why is that important? Of course, from a cost perspective, but it's also important to understand how that works, is because during an audit of the business suite programs, if you're licensed on an employee metric, like in this example, HR, queries that are being executed on the business suite software will validate if the employee or contingent worker flags within the table that is queried during such an audit are being put on yes. So it means again that an end user organization needs to make sure that they actively manage their HR records and their user population to make sure that if people retire or go on maternity leave or they're going on a sabbatical or they're leaving the organization and are finding another opportunity in another company, that all those employees are being flagged within the system as inactive and therefore not authorized to make use of the software anymore. Because if customers forget to do that, then as you can imagine, the number of employees that you would find during an audit will artificially be way higher than what is actually the real situation. And if you can't prove during an audit that those people have left, then you would still need to pay licenses for it. So something to keep in mind in terms of managing your e-business suite installation. Now, if we're then moving to the other application module, it's about enterprise asset management and self-service workers requests. Those two e-business suite products, it is good to be aware of the fact that self-service work request is a so-called option of the parent program called Enterprise Asset Management. So like you have with Oracle database programs where you can have an option on top of the database, for e-business suite you have the same, in which you have a parent product, in this case Enterprise Asset Management, on which you can have additional functionality, an option, which in this case is self-service work request. Now, in case you want to make use of an option on a parent product, then you need to be aware of the fact that options are required to be licensed at the same level as the parent program. So if you have 20 application users for Enterprise Asset Management, then you would need to have 20 application users for self-service work requests as well. But technically, if we're talking about Enterprise Asset Management and self-service work request, the responsibilities for those two modules are usually during the setup and authorization process both defined under Enterprise Asset Management, resulting in the fact that the individuals authorized to make use of self-service work request are counted as an Enterprise Asset Management module. And that obviously artificially increases the number of licenses that you would need to have for Enterprise Asset Management. And therefore, the resolution for that is that you, again, need to make sure that the responsibilities for both self-service request and Enterprise Asset Management are clearly defined within your e-business suite installation itself to avoid an artificial increase of the number of licenses required. Now, I just actually saw that I skipped one slide deck, so I just go back to one other slide, and that is about the primary usage principle. Primary usage is a licensing model that actually has been applied by Oracle many, many years ago, and actually has been applicable up to December 2006. And actually what that licensing model meant is that if you would buy, for example, a license for one application user financials, then an individual authorized to make use of the financials would also have the right to make use of purchasing, discrete manufacturing, process manufacturing, and project costing with the primary usage principle. So it actually means that if you bought one license for one of those specific products, then one application user license would give you the right to make use of those other modules as well. Now, what a lot of people are not aware of is that if you have bought licenses before December 2006, then that primary usage principle is applicable and also remains applicable even if you have purchased licenses after 2006. So I think the next picture maybe makes it a bit more clear for you, but if you would have bought licenses before December 2006 where the primary usage principle was applicable, then in this example in this picture you see that one individual with one license got the right to make use of financials, purchasing, and project costing. Where if you look at the current licensing model for licenses bought where the primary usage principle is not applicable, one individual that has access to financials, purchasing, and project costing would require 3 different licenses. One application user license for financials, one for purchasing, and one for project costing. So being aware of the fact that the primary usage principle has been existing and still is applicable if you purchase licenses before 2006 is something very valuable to keep in mind, because you see that in this example only one license would need to be um, um, counted, where in this case for the same one individual 3 different licenses would be needed. Okay. Then the other thing where a lot of eBusiness Suite customers are confronted with, and where a lot of eBusiness Suite customers do encounter compliance issues with, is with regards to customizations being made to the eBusiness Suite software itself. Because the eBusiness Suite software itself, of course, gives a lot of out-of-the-box functionality, but almost all the organizations that are making use of eBusiness Suite need to perform customizations to the software itself to adjust the functionality to their specific business needs. And these customizations are typically based on the eBusiness Suite application itself, and therefore required to be licensed. So for example, you buy an Oracle Financials license because you want to streamline your business processes from a finance perspective. But then once you start implementing your Oracle Financials software, you find out that you need to adjust it because the way the standard functionality is provided needs to get adjusted in a different way because it doesn't really completely fit your business needs. Now, if you then, for example, make modifications to that standard functionality and you call it, instead of financials, you call it, you give it a completely different name, then you need to be aware that even if you give it a different name, the modifications are still being based upon existing IPR from Oracle. So that modified financials module that you may call aankopen in Dutch or anything else would still need to be accounted for, that the financials IPRs from Oracle are the underlying functionality that is required to be licensed. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, do not keep track of all those modifications being made once they start implementing eBusiness Suite, resulting in the fact that nobody is accounting for the fact that that kind of usage is required to be licensed, and therefore typically comes as a surprise during the course of an audit where this becomes visible. Now, it can also be that customers do make customizations within their eBusiness Suite software, but that they do not base those customizations on an existing eBusiness Suite application itself. They completely build some functionality themselves, which is supported by the eBusiness Suite software, but is not actually based upon the IPRs from Oracle. For those customizations, which are rather rare, but that are not based on an existing eBusiness Suite application, a lot of people tend to forget that those individuals that do make use of that responsibility or that module are still required to be licensed, because although that specific functionality may not be based on the module from eBusiness Suite, it means that those customized modules still make use of the eBusiness Suite infrastructure. For example, the login system from the eBusiness Suite software itself. And therefore, those individuals would be required to license at least the cheapest license of the then current Oracle eBusiness Suite price list in order to make sure that the usage of the infrastructure of the eBusiness Suite software itself is properly covered. It's not uncommon that you see customers being surprised on the fact that the user population of a very specific customized module that is supported by the eBusiness Suite application itself still requires another 100 application user licenses, simply because of the fact that they were not aware that the underlying eBusiness Suite infrastructure is making use or is being used by the customized module, and therefore requires close attention. Now then, the other thing is that if you look at the Oracle eBusiness Suite software, then you of course have the application software itself, which is then supported by the middleware, which is Oracle's Internet Application Server. And then under the Internet Application Server in the architecture, you would have the Oracle database. And what a lot of people sometimes forget is that Oracle was originally a database software company. I think every And then when Oracle started to introduce its eBusiness Suite applications itself, it wanted to gain the market share within the enterprise applications industry. And that is and has been one of Oracle's strategies to make sure that the market share within the application software industry is getting bigger and bigger. Think about it, especially in the past, Oracle didn't have a lot of applications and was competing with the big application software vendors like SAP, where Oracle, from a pricing and licensing perspective, actually did something very smart. Because in order to make sure that it was more attractive for customers to choose for eBusiness Suite than, for example, for SAP, Oracle made sure that in all the eBusiness Suite licenses sold, there was a restricted usage right included for the underlying Oracle Database Enterprise Edition, Internet Application Server, Internet Developer Suite, and Business Intelligence Publisher programs. Which means that if, for example, an end user wanted to make use of HR and Oracle had to compete with SAP, then SAP would offer its application software and had to make notice of the fact that the underlying database and middleware that SAP those days was not able to sell themselves had to be purchased separately. Where from an Oracle perspective, the moment that Oracle came up with their commercial proposal, they could easily say, hey, you get the application, you need to pay for that, but since we are Oracle, you get the restricted use for the Oracle database and the application server included in your eBusiness Suite license. That, of course, from a commercial business case, was very attractive for end users for then choosing for Oracle instead of for SAP, because in SAP they would need to buy additional licenses for the for the database and the middleware platform supporting SAP, where with the business suite software it was already included. The only thing that a lot of people, however, forgot, and from a commercial perspective also typically were not told to customers, but was in the small letters of the license agreements, is that that restricted usage rights was only restricted to the out-of-the-box unmodified eBusiness Suite software. That means that the moment that customers started to make modifications to the software, then it would require separate licenses. And in, well, 99 of the 100 cases, customers need to make modifications to the software. So that restricted use of the Oracle database and application server programs restricted to the out-of-the-box unmodified eBusiness Suite software, and the restricted use of Internet Developer Suite to install and configure Discover, Discover workbooks and end-user layer content, or warehouse metadata to support the enterprise data warehouse delivered with the Oracle applications, was all restricted to the unmodified out-of-the-box eBusiness Suite software. But then, like I said, almost everybody needs to make modifications to the underlying database or to the application server software, resulting in the fact that there would need to be additional licenses for the Oracle Database Enterprise Edition, for the Oracle Internet Application Server Enterprise Edition, and for the development tools through which those modifications are being made, being the Internet Developer Suite and/or Programmer. And those customizations or modifications can include, for example, if you're talking about the Oracle database, that a customer wants to add or modify a row or a column in a table, which typically is something that a lot of users need to do in order to make sure that the database structure from their existing database platform is being streamlined with the Oracle eBusiness Suite database, or adding or modifying stored procedures and or triggers. In any case, if you change those standard setup from the Oracle eBusiness Suite software itself, you would be required to have additional full use licenses for the Oracle Database Enterprise Edition. And as said, this happens almost everywhere, but typically only comes up during the course of an audit, because from a commercial perspective, it has been sold as, hey, the Business Suite software includes a restricted use for the Oracle database, so you don't need to buy anything. Not customers being aware of the fact that those modifications being made to the database still do require additional full use licenses, but nobody has read it in their contracts or have not been made aware of it. Customizations, if you're talking about the application server programs itself, so let's say the middleware layer within the architecture, can, for example, include the creation or the modification of reports or forms, where you need to think about, for example, if you log into the eBusiness Suite software, you will get a standard Oracle logo, but there are customers that say, no, I want to have my logos in there, or I want to make sure that my logo and my address details are being reflected in those reports and forms. So the moment that I give access to other people, it's clearly visible that this is my software and I am invoicing from this, etc., etc. Now, those small changes within the formatting of the Internet Application Server itself already do require you to have full use licenses for the Internet Application Server. So honestly, in all the audits that I've done in my career within Oracle and still the customers that I'm supporting right now with the Business Suite, 99 of the 100 customers do require to have full use licenses for the database and the application server underneath the eBusiness Suite software. And typically, if a customer has not been audited before, they are not aware of this and are surprised with the fact that they need to pay an additional license and support fee to be correctly licensed. Now, those details about the different kinds of modifications that would require separate licenses are included in the so-called Oracle's application licensing table, which is a document which can be found on the oracle.com website. So for those people that do have eBusiness Suite or are working with eBusiness Suite customers, I would definitely recommend you to have a look at that URL. And from a contractual perspective, you need to be aware of the fact that the Oracle Software License and Services Agreement, so the SLSA, or the Oracle License and Services Agreement, the OLSA, or nowadays the Oracle Master Agreements, typically do refer to this application licensing table, which means that a lot of customers say, yeah, I wasn't aware of it. But during the course of an audit, Oracle will at all times refer you to this application licensing table, which is included in your license agreement, and say, based upon that document, which is integral part of your agreement, you should be aware of the fact that those modifications required separate full use licenses, and therefore you can't say you were not aware of it if you didn't read the contract. The funny thing in there is, however, and that is more from a commercial perspective, something to be aware of, is that the license agreements before 2000 did not include the reference to this application licensing table. Doesn't mean that Oracle's position is different, but of course, from an how much has the customer been educated perspective, contractually, the fact that nowadays, since 2000, this URL is in the contracts, and before that it wasn't in there, gives you some space for negotiation and commercial settlements in case you end up in such a discussion. Now, the funny thing in there as well, and that's what I wanted to mention as well about those modifications, is that those modifications or customizations are typically done by consultancy firms. End user organizations typically don't do that themselves, and they hire an implementation party or a consulting firm or even Oracle Consulting itself to do these kind of activities. And a lot of end users then typically think, well, if it has licensing implications, then those consultancy firms will make me aware of it, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not their core of business. That's not what they're hired for. They're not hired to look into your license agreements and to understand what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And therefore, those consultancy firms typically do not make you aware of this. And the non-compliance issues are therefore often only discovered many years after the implementation of the Business Suite software itself, resulting in the fact that there are a lot of unexpected financial risks and costs related to the fact that those customizations typically come up 5, 6, 7, 8 years after the implementation itself, and therefore typically causing an emotion within those end users about the fact if we would have known this up front, then we would have never chosen for eBusiness Suite. But then it's typically too late because the business is already running on it. And although organizations often try to claim back then those costs to those consultancy firms, organizations need to be aware that in the end, the organization is fully responsible and accountable for complying with the terms and conditions of its license agreements. And you can say, yeah, but Oracle Consulting should have told me, or my implementation party should have told me. But in reality, legally and contractually, you are responsible for making sure that the terms and conditions are being followed up. So we're approaching the end of this presentation. I hope that within this presentation we have given you a first glance of how the e-business suite licensing works and what's the most common license compliance issues we see, and that it helps you to be educated on what things you need to look into in order to address those financial risks. The overall takeaway that I'm always giving to every end user organization or to anyone who is working with end user organization that is making use of enterprise software is that due to the complexity and the level of detail that you need to know in order to manage your, in this case, Oracle e-business suite licenses properly, make sure that it becomes a priority at C-level and make sure that there is budget for the proper software license management practices tailored to the specific needs of your organization. And make sure that there is an internal software license management team of multiple disciplines: procurement, legal, infrastructure managers, business application managers, and make sure that you get C-level sponsorship and review on a regular basis what your real entitlements are, what the deployment and licensable usage of the software really is, and reconcile those two on a regular basis in order to identify and address any software license compliance issues proactively instead of being surprised by an audit from Oracle or any other vendor in which you are typically then too late are being confronted with unexpected financial costs. So that's my takeaway for this presentation. We have another 10 minutes for any questions. So Pascal, if you can open up the lines so that anyone who would want to ask a question can raise them. Are the lines open, Pascal? I think that's a note that there are no questions, but let me just go one roundabout. Are there any questions or any feedback that you would want to give us about the presentation? Was it helpful? Would you want to see things differently? We're open for any feedback, so please feel free to speak up. Opening up audio for attendees now, I see. I see that for Renee it was clear, but the audio is not working properly. Okay, very good. We can only open up the lines for one person at a time. I wasn't aware of that. But I see Renee, it's great to see that it was clear. And if you have any further questions, then absolutely let us know. Great, Wanda, thanks. That it was a good session. We'll catch up soon. Ingrid, interesting and good. Very good. Okay. We will distribute the presentation after this session as well. For those that would want to have a copy, we will make sure that you receive a copy. Our contact details are in there as well, so if you have any further questions at a later stage, feel free to reach out to Tudor or myself. And then I would say let's run up for the next session in a couple of months. We will broadcast the next session, which on top of my head is about ULAs, on the social media and on our website soon if there is if it's ready. So thank you then for now. I wish everybody a happy weekend and talk to you soon.